Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. You ready to get into it?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right, so today we're delving into the disappearance and murder of 5-year-old Britney Llear.
Yeah, this case is just heartbreaking. And it happened back in 1998 in rural North Carolina. Brittany vanished from her driveway while waiting for the school bus.
It's a case that has haunted the Lumbee community for decades.
Yeah, and they have incredibly deep roots in this area. They even drove out the KKK back in the 50s.
Wow, so this crime must have really shaken them.
Absolutely. It really did. It's a case that has stuck with people.
So let's go back to that morning in January 1998. Brittany and her mom, Connie, were walking down their long driveway to wait for the bus.
And we're talking rural North Carolina here. So not your typical suburban neighborhood.
Right, their closest neighbor, Rose Johnson, was within eyeshot, but still pretty far away.
And Connie had to use the restroom.
Oh no.
Yeah, and she thought the bus would be there any minute. So she made the tough decision to leave Brittany alone for just a few minutes.
I can't even imagine.
It's a decision that has haunted her ever since. She came back to find Brittany gone. And then there's Rose Johnson's account. She saw a truck stopping briefly at the driveway.
So that adds another layer to this whole thing.
It really does.
The discovery of Britney's belongings really shifts the focus of the investigation, doesn't it?
Well,
What can we learn from where and how those items were found?
yeah, so the initial investigation was massive. Hundreds of people searching. They found Brittany's backpack and some of her clothing a few miles from her home.
Hmm. So what does that tell us?
Well, it makes you wonder, was she taken from the driveway and then her things were disposed of later? Or was she taken to that second location?
I see. So it adds another layer of complexity to figuring out what the perpetrator did and why.
Exactly. And then just a few hours later, Brittany's body was found in a drainage ditch.
Oh, that's awful.
It was later confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted and drowned.
So that obviously changes the whole investigation, right? It goes from a missing persons case to a homicide.
Exactly. And that brings a whole new set of challenges and pressures.
Right. So where did investigators go from there?
Well, early on, they looked into a number of leads, starting with Brittany's biological father, who had been absent from her life.
Makes sense to start there.
Right. Rule out the obvious.
Did that lead anywhere?
No, it didn't. He was quickly ruled out. But it does highlight how complex these cases can become.
Right, even in the early stages.
Exactly. Then there was this brown truck with overhead lights.
Okay, I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, several witnesses described it, and it became a focal point of the investigation. Led investigators down a lot of dead ends.
You know, it seems like such a specific detail. But it also makes you wonder, could focusing on that truck have been a sign that investigators were kind of grasping at straws?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I mean, in these cases, a detail like that can be both a blessing and a curse. It can focus the investigation, but it can also lead you down the wrong path.
Right. And this case definitely had its share of twists and turns.
For sure. Remember those public appeals for information?
Oh, yeah. Those generated thousands of tips.
They did. But no real breakthroughs?
And then things took a really controversial turn with the rumors about Brittany's school principal, George Marston.
Those rumors really show how fast speculation can take hold in a case like this.
What were they about?
Well, there was a misquoted statement about Marston giving Brittany rides to school, which he later clarified.
But even so, that puts him under suspicion.
Exactly. And it's tough for anyone connected to the case to deal with that scrutiny and public pressure.
Absolutely. I can only imagine.
And then Connie and her husband Charles even volunteered to take polygraph tests and give DNA samples to clear their names.
Wow. I can only imagine the emotional toll that must have taken on them. Grieving the loss of their daughter and at the same time trying to prove their innocence.
It really speaks volumes about their character.
For sure. And then eventually the FBI took over the investigation. What does that tell you about how authorities were viewing the case at that point?
Well, the FBI often steps in when local resources are overwhelmed or the case has potential interstate implications.
So they must have recognized how complex and serious Britney's disappearance was.
Absolutely. It's a big turning point.
And yet it seems like even with their expertise, the trail went cold.
Yeah, sadly, that's the reality for many families and investigators. Sometimes, despite the best efforts, cases just hit a wall. But the story doesn't end there.
Because this is where a new sheriff, Jim Davis, enters the picture.
Right. And with him comes a dramatic shift in the narrative.
What do you mean?
Well, he accused his predecessor, Sheriff Wayne Byrd, and Byrd's son Robin, of a conspiracy to cover up Robin's alleged involvement.
Wow, that must have been a complete shock to the community.
It was. You can see why this move raised a lot of eyebrows.
So was it a genuine attempt to uncover the truth, or was there something else going on?
It's hard to say for sure.
And here's the thing. There was absolutely no concrete evidence to support Sheriff Davis's accusations.
Right. The State Bureau of Investigation and the district attorney dismissed his theory.
And Connie Llear publicly accused him of exploiting her daughter's death for political gain.
It's a serious accusation, and it makes you think about the delicate balance between pursuing all angles and potentially jeopardizing the integrity of an investigation.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And just when it seemed like the case had reached a dead end, a new lead emerges.
Right. This time it involves a firefighter at Fort Bragg named Keith Douglas Laundrie. He was arrested for armed robbery, and photos of Britney were found in his locker.
Wait, what? So he was potentially connected to the initial search efforts because Fort Bragg firefighters were involved.
Exactly.
So how could someone be both a searcher and a person of interest?
It's definitely a strange twist. They collected his DNA, but he was ultimately excluded as a suspect.
So another dead end.
Mm.
But despite all these setbacks, hope wasn't entirely lost. In 2009, a new sheriff, Hubert Peterin, decided to start the investigation from scratch, seeking a fresh perspective. And he remained incredibly dedicated to the case until he passed away in 2021.
His dedication really shows the lasting impact of this case, not just on the community, but on those tasked with solving it. He really believed that Britney deserved justice and that her killer could still be found.
That's incredible. So even with all the twists and turns and dead ends, there was still hope.
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely gave the community some hope. But even with all those efforts, the question remains who killed Britney Llear. We've explored so many lead suspects, even accusations, but the answer, it just keeps eluding us.
It really does feel like this case has had more than its fair share of twists and turns. It's easy to get lost in all the details. So what does this all mean for our listeners? What are some of the big takeaways we can get from this deep dive?
Well, one thing that sticks out is the importance of the community being involved in investigations like this. The Lumbee community really rallied around Britney's family. They provided support, assisted with the searches. That kind of involvement is so crucial in rural areas where resources can be stretched thin.
And their presence throughout the investigation, even when there were those accusations and setbacks, it speaks volumes about their resilience and determination to get justice for Britney.
For sure. This case also highlights how important clear communication from law enforcement is. Think about Sheriff Byrd's public statements about potential suspects that might have actually hindered the investigation. And then you have Sheriff Davis and his accusations against the former sheriff. It all just muddied the waters.
Right. It seems like transparency and careful consideration before going public with information are really important in sensitive cases like this.
Absolutely. And we can't overlook the fact that Britney was an Indigenous girl living in a rural area. This case sadly highlights the disproportionate rates of violence against Indigenous women and the challenges they face in accessing justice.
It's a tragic reminder that Britney's case isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a much larger systemic issue that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, for sure. Another point that deserves attention is the discovery of Britney's belongings, especially her clothes being discarded. It raises so many questions about what the perpetrator did and why. Was this a planned crime? Or was it impulsive? Understanding those details could be key to finally solving this mystery.
Yeah, those are questions that have bothered investigators for years.
Absolutely. And finally, the fact that Britney's case remains unsolved is a stark reminder of the challenges that families face when a homicide goes unsolved. The Lumbee community continues to grieve, and the unanswered questions, they just linger even after all this time.
It's a reminder that justice delayed is justice denied. We often talk about cases going cold, but for the families, the pain and the need for answers never go away. What stands out to you from this case? What are some things you're still thinking about?
For me, it's the brown trucks. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a brown truck near the bus stop, and investigators chased down countless leads involving brown trucks. Makes you wonder if they were all just focusing on the wrong detail or maybe overlooking something else that was crucial because of that one detail.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Was the brown truck a real piece of the puzzle, or was it just a distraction?
Right. Something to think about. And another thing that struck me was the impact of all the rumors and speculation.
Oh, yeah.
This case was just full of accusations and innuendo and political maneuvering that undoubtedly complicated the investigation.
Absolutely. The accusations against Britney's family, the rumors about the political battles between the sheriffs, it all created so much noise that could have drowned out valuable information.
Exactly. It shows how crucial it is to separate fact from fiction in cases like this.
So where does that leave us? What are some potential next steps in this case?
Well, despite all the challenges, the case is still active. Sheriff Peterin's commitment to starting from scratch and pursuing new leads gives us some hope. Plus, advances in DNA technology, especially familial DNA testing, could be a game changer. You see, familial DNA testing wasn't available back in 1998.
Right.
This technique allows investigators to search for potential relatives of a suspect in DNA databases, so it could be huge in a case like Britney's.
That's encouraging. Familial DNA testing has helped solve other cold cases, so it makes sense that it could be the key to finally understanding what happened to Britney.
It's a powerful tool, and it could bring closure to Britney's family and finally bring justice for her tragic death. We've talked a lot about the investigation and the challenges, but we can't forget the human side of this story. Connie Llear has never given up hope. She's been a tireless advocate for her daughter, keeping Britney's memory alive and pushing for answers.
Her strength and resilience are incredible. It's a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, the human spirit can endure.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that even though this case is decades old, there's still hope. Someone out there knows what happened to Britney. They may have a piece of information that they think is small or insignificant, but it could be the missing piece of the puzzle that investigators need.
So if you have any information, no matter how small it may seem, please come forward. Contact the Hope County Sheriff's Office or the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. Your tip could be the one that finally brings justice for Britney.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive, and I hope it's giving you some new perspectives on this tragic case. What are some things you, as our listener, should be thinking about as you process all of this information?
That's a great question. What are some things our listeners can take away from this story?
Well, I think it's important to consider the bigger picture. What does this case tell us about how vulnerable children are in rural communities? How can we do a better job of protecting them and making sure they're safe?
Those are really important questions that need more exploration.
Absolutely. And we need to think about how we can improve communication and collaboration between law enforcement agencies. That way we can make sure investigations are thorough and unbiased.
These are issues that go way beyond this one case.
Exactly. And finally, it's crucial to think about the lasting legacy of Britney Llear's case. It's a story about loss and resilience and the ongoing pursuit of justice.
Yeah, it's a story that makes you think about what you can do, even from where you are, to help address this issue of violence against Indigenous people.
Well, there are a lot of organizations out there dedicated to this cause. Some support families of missing and murdered Indigenous people. Others are working on policy changes or just raising awareness.
Yeah.
Even just educating yourself about the history and the challenges that Indigenous communities face is a good first step.
Yeah, knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And in this case, it can really lead to change.
Absolutely. Remember, justice for Britney Llear is still possible. Someone out there knows what happened, and that piece of information could be the key to finally solving this case.
You really can't overstate the impact you could have. So if you have any information at all, please don't hesitate to contact the authorities.
And if this deep dive has made you want to learn more about other unsolved cases, especially those involving missing and murdered Indigenous people, there are a ton of resources online and through organizations dedicated to these issues.
We'll put some links in the show notes to get you started.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to leave you with one last thought. We talked about the potential of familial DNA testing in this case. Imagine if investigators had had access to that technology back in 1998. Could it have led to a faster resolution? Could it have prevented years of pain and uncertainty for Britney's family?
It's a tough question to think about.
Yeah.
The advancement of technology gives us new ways to solve cold cases, but it also makes you think about what could have been.
Yeah. It reminds us that even though justice can be delayed, it doesn't have to be denied.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the disappearance and murder of Britney Llear. We hope this has given you a new perspective on this tragic case and maybe even inspired you to take action.
Remember, even a small effort can make a difference.